Morning, everybody. Welcome to our session today on metrics that matter. We'll get started shortly just after everybody files in here.
We'll just give it one more minute and then we'll kick things off.
Good morning, everyone.
Great. It seems like most people have had a chance to start filtering in. Laura, do you want to go to the next slide and we can do some housekeeping?
Sure.
Thank you so much. Well, I will also say good morning to everyone here. Thank you so much for joining our webinar today. My name is Sarah and I'm a member of the marketing team here at Bullhorn. Just before I hand things over to Laura and Joe, wanted to cover just a few brief housekeeping items. So first and foremost, today's webinar will be recorded and you'll be receiving a recording of the webinar within the next 24 hours. So if you want to rewatch anything, send it on to any of your teammates who weren't able to join or anything, you'll have this as a resource after the fact. Secondly, everyone will be muted during today's presentation, but we do have the Q&A panel at the bottom, and we do highly encourage you to ask any questions you might have. We have some dedicated time later today in today's session to address as many questions as we have time for. Lastly, we should finish up in about 45 minutes, including that Q&A session. Thanks again for joining, and I'll pass things over to Laura to kick things off.
Excellent. Thank you, Sarah. Just a reminder before we kind of dig in here is that today's session is actually the first of 3 sessions focused on Bullhorn Analytics and metrics that matter. And so wanted to share this at the beginning just in case you haven't registered for the following 2 sessions. But the goal of today's session is to really be that first conversation around data and what we're thinking about. And then the following sessions will lead on from there. So to kick off, I'm Laura Bumby. I'm a Senior Manager of Sales and Strategy here at Bullhorn. I'm specifically focused on our analytics and automation product suites. Joining me today is Joe McGuire. Joe, do you care to introduce yourself?
Thank you, Laura. Thanks for having me on your series as well. So yeah, I'm the Strategy Director for Analytics. I joined Bullhorn about 18 months ago via the acquisition of Cube19, where I was the Chief Revenue Officer. So I've been thinking about and focusing on data and analytics in staffing for well over 10 years now.
Great. Thank you. Thank you. And we're excited for this session today and to use your knowledge and share it with everyone. So the way the conversation is going to go today is really starting out with understanding what's happening in the market. What are some priorities that we're seeing from staffing firms and from our clients? And then thinking about how data can really impact those challenges. Understanding some of the mindset shifts, some of the things that need to happen internally in staffing organizations in order to realize the benefits of having data or being an analytics-driven firm, and then what actionable insights are. I'll leave it at that. I won't give too much more around actionable insights, but really the power of how that can change your business. And then we're going to talk about where to start, how to get things moving within your firm, what to be thinking about, again, as we move to the next session of this webinar in a few weeks' time. Again, as Sarah said, we have the Q&A. Please feel free to use it throughout the course of the conversation today. We'll be taking questions from there at the end, and just really looking forward to a collaborative session. So to kick things off, again, we're going to talk about challenges and priorities, right? What we're hearing that's happening in the market, what we've been seeing, right? The conversations we've been having with our clients, the data that Bullhorn's analyzing. And so we really want to focus on what are these underlying conditions that are impacting our clients. And if we look at the grid data, we do our grid survey every year. We interview thousands of global staffing firms to understand kind of what their priorities are, what their goals are, what their challenges are. And this year, for the first time ever, winning new business was the number one priority for our clients. And so really impactful that that was for the first time ever the number one priority. We're really seeing that, there's a tightening of the belt happening in the market, right? Projects are being put on hold, or companies are being more selective in the hiring process, right? There's a bit of a slowing down that we started to see at the end of 2022. And so as a result, our clients are seeing fewer jobs maybe than they had in the last few years. And so winning new business has really been top of mind. The second priority here is digital transformation. And this should be familiar, right? We've been talking about this for years, but this is, at this point in time, this is staffing firms really acknowledging that they need to be more proactive in modernizing their solutions, right? We see this in decelerations all the time, right? We go, we bring on people, we bring on technology because we're trying to fulfill the business that we have. As soon as that market decelerates, we now have time to breathe, but we also have time to focus on, hey, what have we been actually doing? How developed are our people? Or where's our technology stack? Where are we at? How well are we using all of these pieces of software that we've purchased? And so again, this is companies and staffing firms really thinking, hey, if we don't modernize now, if we're not really pushing digital transformation, if we're not investing in digital transformation today, we now know we're not going to be able to be competitive in that marketplace in the future, right? This could impede our future growth opportunities, acquisition opportunities, whatever that might be. So again, we've been talking about digital transformation a lot over the last few years. And what's driven this over that period of time has been the talent shortage and thinking about candidate acquisition. And so that's still at the top, right? That's the number 3 priority. It was the number 1 priority last year. And so if we think about candidate acquisition, it's still crucially important. And it's gonna remain important, right? Baby boomers are leaving, Gen Z is coming into the market, but what's happening there is baby boomers are leaving with all of their skills and experience. And Gen Z's coming in, they want to work, they're ready to go, but they don't have those skills, they don't have the experience. And there's still a huge gap there for experienced candidates, which again is supporting demand for what we do, right? Supporting demand for what we do every day. So if we dig in a little bit deeper into kind of why these priorities, this is SIA do a pulse survey a few times a year. And one of the main questions they ask is, how difficult is it on a scale of 1 to 5 to recruit in this market today? And so another component of that is, and again, how difficult is it for you to sell or do business development or win new clients in this market today? And so we've been hearing again from our clients that, hey, we have had all this business for the last few years. It's been really easy to do business development, or it's been really easy to sell our services. And now it's becoming a little bit more challenging, right? So we know recruitment's high turnover. We know the staffing industry, we turn over people. We've had so many of our clients hire someone in the last 18, 24, 36 months. And then things were wild there, right? For a little bit during COVID. And jobs were easy, kind of doing that was a lot easier of a job. And so jobs were easy to come by. They didn't have to really face a challenge. They didn't really have to dig in and understand a lot of what they were doing. So now what we're seeing is that for the first time since 2020, it's challenging selling our services, but it's also equally as challenging as finding a candidate in this market from the recruitment side. So again, if we think back to the grid data I just showed, this is what's driving some of that. But if we think about what else it could be driving, it's driving our clients looking for ways to drive efficiencies, right? How can we increase the efficiency of our team? All of these salespeople that we hired that are now having a hard time, how can we make them more efficient and go back and train them or utilize our technology to make them better? All of our recruiters who are having a challenging time, how can we use automation or how can we use data to drive efficiency, to drive a focus on building those candidate pools? So again, thinking about all of these different kind of components of everything is what we're seeing across the industry. So if we then, the last step now is kind of thinking about winning new business even deeper. So if winning new business is the number 1 priority of staffing firms today, what are the challenges when it comes to winning new business? So you can see at the top, increased competition, hiring freezes, lack of budget from prospective clients. This is kind of what's been at the top when our grid survey took place. And it's interesting, like as 2023 has kind of moved in, we're halfway through the year now, we're actually seeing that it's even less about maybe increased competition, still important, but the lack of budget or clients really taking longer to make decisions, maybe even hiring freezes. Those are the things that are really driving some of the challenges within winning new business. And so, we're seeing layoffs happening, or clients are hearing about more candidates maybe on the market, which, yes, there's more candidates on the market, but are they those skilled candidates? And so what's happening is that your clients are saying, hey, maybe we don't need to hurry up and hire for this role right now. Maybe we can slow down a little bit. Or maybe, hey, instead of hiring this first candidate we interviewed, maybe I'm going to take multiple candidates for interview. Maybe I'm going to take my time to make our hiring decision. And so that's what we find that staffing firms are feeling the effects of, is that it's taking longer for all of these clients to make decisions. And what's happening is that these hiring processes are getting so elongated that maybe the client's losing budget mid-search, or maybe that department no longer needs the headcount, or maybe there's an acquisition that takes place and they don't need to fill the role anymore. So we're seeing a lot of staffing firms focusing their sales teams on going out and winning new clients. So that's kind of the full picture of why all that's happening. But what we're also seeing is that there's a lot of wasted effort from account managers, from sales teams, from recruitment teams in staffing right now, right? And if we think about what that actually means, this is just an example of what I'm doing here is I want to illustrate kind of exactly what we've been seeing, the conversations we've been having with clients in staffing firms in the market right now. And that is because these clients are taking longer to make decisions, because things are slowing down, because there's that tightening of the belt, we're seeing elongated sales cycles, right? So on the far right, we are seeing that time to fill increase exponentially, and it's actually taking longer for you to fill a job today than it has over the last 3, 4, 5 years. And as it's taking longer for you to hire, it's going to cost you more money, right? It's going to cost you longer to cost you more money to fill that role. And so no matter what your gross margin is, gross profit is on that job, no matter what, because it's taking you longer to fill it, what you're actually earning on that job is considerably less. So what does that all mean for why are we here? Why are we talking about metrics if I'm talking all about what's happening in the market? Well, it's because how do we impact this, right? How do we decrease things like time to fill? How do we ensure that those sales teams that are having a challenge winning new business right now, how can we make sure that we can impact that in a positive way? How can we improve efficiencies? How can we make sure we're getting the most out of our producers and recruiters? And how can we make sure that we're having them spend their time on revenue generating activities, right? That's what we're wanting to solve here today. And spoiler alert, right? Like we can do that through becoming a data-driven organization. That's the key here. So how can we start to use data in a way that we haven't seen staffing firms use data before? And so I'll turn it over to Joe here to kind of take the reins on how we're challenging some of those traditional views on data. Joe?
Thank you, Laura. Yeah, so I think this all comes down to mindset. I truly believe that the staffing industry has fallen behind and is falling further behind a lot of other industries when it comes to getting value from data and the maximum value from data. And I think it's primarily because of mindset. So Laura's highlighted some challenges in the market today, and those challenges aren't new. Anyone that's been in staffing for any sort of extended period of time, it's a cyclical industry that's often closely aligned to economic situations. So we know that there's candidate shortages and we know that there's client shortages at times, but the year and the decade that we experience these challenges mean that there's different mechanisms behind there or different things that are driving it or could solve these problems. And I don't necessarily think the mindset of how data is used in this industry is keeping up with the evolution of how we're recruiting. If you think about any sort of business that like Netflix or loyalty schemes or anything like that, they're tracking the changing in behavior, and they are alerting and notifying and making decisions based on those changes. But I think partly because of the lack of availability of data in staffing over the years, the mindset has always been around volume. If I talk to a lot of business leaders in this industry about data, the first thing they quote is KPI, and KPIs by their nature have always been volume-based metrics. How many jobs did Julie bring in this week? How many client submissions or interviews did Bruce arrange this week? And volume is a really important part of what we do in this industry. If I think back nearly 20 years when I started as a recruiter, most of the successful recruiters I looked at worked really, really hard. They were on the phone the whole time to clients and candidates, and they were successful because of it. But so hard work and motivation are still really important to this. But the old saying, work smart, not hard, that can't be achieved if you're measuring purely volume-based metrics. Now, the problem with the whole mindset of KPIs and measuring how many things have happened, whether that be revenue or activity, is that you're measuring things that have already happened. They're in the past. So when we think about the data journey, companies are at different stages of this bell curve. I think a lot more companies now are sort of way into the oversight and are starting to definitely think about, if not step into the foresight zone. But there's still a lot of companies that most of the things they measure are backwards looking. They're looking at yesterday or earlier today or last week or last month. So I really think thinking about foresight, the forward-looking perspective, is so important. Thinking about showing individuals within the business the things they should do today to be more successful tomorrow. And not just how many things, but who should they be speaking to? Which contractors are coming to the end of their assignment imminently that haven't had a client submission or interview? People that need engaging with. Like using data to overcome the challenges that are in front of the business today. And some of them are external economic challenges and some are internal business challenges. Data should be the thing that helps identify, but also then tells you if things are working, like A/B test. We went this path in one direction, this path to test it out, and this worked better. Let's do more of this or iterate this. So I really do think it's about challenging that status quo and working out what it is that someone should be doing. So on the candidate side, how many interviews should you get each candidate to stand the best chance of placing that candidate? Not how many overall interviews to get a crude ratio. On the client side, if the market's tightening, well, I suppose actually if I think about this from a software world, a SaaS world, churn is one of the most important metrics in a SaaS business, client churn. And we measure it all day, every day, in every variation of how we can look at it. And we look to why and how we can improve. And I don't think staffing companies do that in the same realm, particularly when business development was coming easy, when jobs were flying through the door. But I would urge everyone to start thinking about those things, start thinking about the clients you work with, the effort that goes into servicing those clients, how much effort it takes to bring in a new client versus an existing client, a new client versus an existing client to retain them, and so on. And it's much, much more than just looking at how many things did someone do. It's about the intricate detail of that data and how it benefits the masses within the company. Laura, if you could flip on to the next slide, please. So I also, when I think about data, I think about the organizational structure of a company, and I think about the typical use cases for different levels of the org. And if you look in a staffing company, and most companies in general, the leadership team is often a smaller number of people than the management team, and that's a smaller number of people than certainly the sales organization, the front office producers. When investment comes for things like data, from a mindset perspective, it's always been that data is a management tool, it's a leadership tool. So heavy investment is going into increasing the volume of data, the types of data and data sources that leadership are looking at. And don't get me wrong, I think that's hugely important. And it's definitely things that people should be looking at. But when you think about this pyramid in terms of the availability of data to each of those user types, it's almost like an inverse pyramid. You have lots of data at the top for the small group of people, and then as you come down to the desk, there's often very limited data available to your sales reps and your recruiters. They're often looking at volume-based data, like I've mentioned, but would it not be that there's such a level of granularity that needs to be identified when you reach the desk? Because every in a software business, especially if you're selling a simple product, you sell the same thing to every company every time. Whereas staffing is far more complex than that. Every candidate is unique. Every job is unique. Every business culture that you're trying to put together with the candidate is unique. So the difficulty of filling certain job types versus others, the volume-based versus even exec search at the other end, there's so many variables within there that mean data needs to be thought about in a very granular and more detailed way rather than just a generic volume way. So I think that's what it all comes down to is just thinking about what the challenges are in the business, trying to understand those challenges from a data perspective as much as possible. So from Laura's perspective in the earlier stats, how are those data points affecting your business today? Or are they not? Some industries are not as affected by the talent shortage. Some are not as affected by the client shortage. But looking at what data points will help you identify whether they are actually impacting your business. And then more importantly, how to overcome them. What action should be taken and when. Which I think then leads us sort of nicely into the thinking about actionable insights. I suppose one more comment I should make on the pyramid is that leadership having information about the business is really important to make strategic, longer-term decisions. At the other end of the pyramid, the front office producers, there's so many more of those people typically in a staffing business that even marginal gains across all of those resources can mean massive impact and massive benefit for the business as a whole. So it's not about having to move the needle the whole way, move the needle a little bit, add those things together, and you start to see massive profitability gains within the business. But I touched on this briefly before. Where is your team spending their time? Are they spending it in the right time, in the right way, with the right people, doing the right tasks? And again, the evolution of staffing. I mean, I think if I just think about the last 3 to 5 years, how much staffing has moved on in terms of availability of software, in terms of automation, omni-channel communication. There's such a drastic shift in mindset. We've got AI entering, our real world day-to-day imminently. And all of those things will change how we service clients and candidates. And that means that the things we're measuring and how we're measuring them have to evolve at that pace as well. And I think at the moment, we're still, from a data perspective as an industry, still focused on the how many things, do more and you'll be more successful. And actually, I think we have to change that entire mindset to fit the evolving world of staffing.
Yeah, and I think then to kind of build upon that is how are your teams spending their time? How do we ensure that we are using data to drive them to the right behaviors, right? To drive them to be spending the time on the right things. And that's where actionable insights really bring a lot of value, right? As Joe mentioned, if we think about data in a traditional way, or we think about reporting or thinking about analytics, so much of that is, again, volume-based, looking retrospectively, what's happened in the past. And there's value there, right? Staffing firms have been running off KPIs since the inset of staffing firms. And so, yes, absolutely, we can learn from that data. There's value there. But the best we can ever do with that is say, hey, Mr. and Mrs. Recruiter, if you'd done this differently last week, you'd have been really good yesterday, right? Or you would have been really good last month. And so what Actionable Insights do is instead show those sales teams, those recruiter teams, hey, this is the activity you should be taking today in order to be successful tomorrow. And this is where that foresight stage that Joe spoke about comes into play. So if we think about like practically applying this to a day-to-day, what is more valuable? Telling a sales rep or a BD person how many BD calls they have made or need to make, or actually showing them all the companies they've previously placed with that they haven't reached out to recently, right? Where do you want your BD people spending their time? Just going through the CRM and trying to find someone to call, or looking up, investor relations and Google, searches to try to find companies to call, or saying, hey, we have done business with this client before. No one's called them in 6 months. We made 10 placements with them last year, this is who you should call, right? So that's, again, focusing that behavior. Those incremental improvements are almost like compounding interest over time and are able to be built upon. In the same mind, right? Thinking about telling a recruiter, hey, here's how many interviews you've arranged. That's great. Or instead showing them all of those candidates who maybe have interviewed or who are silver medalists. Maybe they got rejected from an interview, but we haven't submitted them anywhere else, right? Again, thinking about a candidate short market, how can we make sure that those great candidates, those skilled, experienced candidates that we have who are engaged with our brand, who are willing and open and ready to interview and on the market, how can we make sure we capitalize on them the most and get them another interview with another client? So again, just thinking about putting this into the hands of that bottom of the pyramid and really using that to drive data. So how do we start with all this, right? Clearly, it's a lot to think about when we're thinking about how do we drive this within our business? How do we start moving the needle? Again, a lot of the firms we talk to are data driven at some point, right? You have a team of people maybe putting together reports. You have people looking at data, but maybe that data is only going to that top leadership, that top of the pyramid. So how do we get to a point where we can start to trickle this down? The first way is exactly what Joe just said, right? Thinking about shifting your mindset. So I always like to say in this part, like, be curious, right? I think oftentimes we hire people into recruitment who are curious or who want to understand like what's going on. But again, thinking about understanding, hey, why are things the way they are now? How can we improve what's going on in our business? How can we get more candidates to interview? How can we get more contractors redeployed? The second step is then, again, thinking about moving beyond just getting an automated report every day, right? Or getting an automated report every week about what happened last week. And again, thinking about utilizing data-driven insights or realizing that just automating something is really not enough. And we need to be able to focus on using data to gain insights into being able to make informed decisions, right? That's the key there. We have the data, it's given us insight into something. Now we can make that decision. And then encourage that participation, right? This is, again, the mindset shift is a huge piece, especially internally. A lot of the clients we talk to, we have a lot of different conversations on Joe and on my side. But I think one of the common conversations is like, oh, we have a data team, but they're not really talking to our sales team, or they're not really talking to our marketing team. And so we have these kind of segmented areas. So encourage those teams to collaborate, right? Encourage those different parts of your organization to become involved and to understand what the data project is, because a lot of what the data you're seeing here is going to impact sales. It's going to impact marketing, right? It's not just sending a report to someone. So if we can create a collaborative environment where we have all these different insights and all these different pieces of expertise that come together, you can now drive innovation, right? You can now drive that improvement. So the second way to start is my favorite, but it's really democratizing your data, right? Again, who can utilize it, bringing data that your teams have access to, right? Empowering those people at the desk level with things like actionable insights in order to tell them to how to drive their behavior, what they should be working on, where they should be focusing on, right? I think what you'll see from a shift as clients are, or as you're bringing in more data to those people, it's really powerful of how they then use that to drive their day. And last but not least, driving the behavioral change, right? There's a few really big components here. Joe talked about one is that, business intelligence, data analytics, it's not just for leaders. It's not just for your executives. It's not just for your C-suite. And so moving beyond thinking about, hey, this group of people has this really exclusive information that we know that happened last month or last quarter, and really acknowledging, hey, we can drive a lot of positive change with this. And again, like when data is more accessible, the questions that you start hearing from your teams, how managers manage is going to evolve significantly. I cannot tell you how many times, once you start bringing data into an organization, now all of a sudden your producers, your recruiters, they really care about what's in Bullhorn, right? They really care what's about in your ATS. They make sure that the data they're putting into the ATS is accurate. They make sure that they're taking that to their managers during their weekly one-to-ones and saying, hey, here's where I'm at. Here's how many interviews I still need to get this week, right? Or here's how many contractors I have coming off assignment. Here's who I'm working on redeploying for this week. So I think the key component here is that a tool is really only as good as the people who are willing to use it, right? We all know that. And so really thinking about building a culture around data, investing in people who are thinking about outcomes instead of outputs, and then thinking about, hey, if we can do all of that, this is when we can start to understand the opportunity, right? We can start to see where the opportunities are in our business to drive efficiencies, to be able to realize gains, to realize those incremental improvements, and then we can start to prioritize based on facts versus feel, right? So much of what those producers, those recruiters, those salespeople are doing now is feel-based, right? I really like this client, so I'm going to call them and see if they have a job. Or this client made a couple placements with us, I think, a few months ago. Let me call them. Or, hey, I know that I can redeploy this candidate over and over again because I know what they want. They're going to go to what's comfortable based on feeling. We want to start prioritizing things based on facts, right? And so again, using actionable insights to drive that. And so again, thinking about Bullhorn Analytics in that respect of, hey, we can not only now recognize where the opportunity is, but we'll now be able to have foresight in predicting what that impact will be across the business in general.
Yeah,
So
great,
I was
Laura.
going to say, Joe, do you want to add anything there?
Yeah, please. I was just going to say that if you're investing in data, if you're investing in data at leadership level or any level of the business, please keep doing that. We're not saying that you shouldn't be doing any of those things. We're not saying that KPIs are a thing of the past or shouldn't be measured. Quite the opposite. Data used in the right way for the right reasons with the right people is essential in my mind for continually evolving successfully. The one thing I would encourage, and one thing I didn't really talk about on the bell curve earlier, when we got to foresight, there's really a stage past that people are trying to get to. And that is because we're talking primarily operational process data, like ATS data and anything around that process. There's a big piece that a lot of companies are investing huge sums of money in very lengthy, quite risky, often projects, where you're trying to bring in every data source from every system into one place. Now, that is really, really important. And I think some companies have done it well, but a lot of companies have spent a lot of money trying to get to that stage before realizing the value of foresight and desk level actionable insights. So you can do those things in unison. You should probably do them in unison, but thinking about what you're investing in, who you're investing for, and what the outcome you expect to see is, I think is a really, really important factor within this, and making sure that, you know, the people that are looking at the data, it's valuable to them. Recruiters don't care about how many things they did yesterday. They care about how many, what things and where they should do today to be more successful tomorrow and driving that success factor. And that will drive adoption, as Laura said, and so on. So that's really what I want to say. Whatever you're doing with data, you're doing the right thing. It's an evolution is where we're trying to take this.
Exactly. Excellent. Thanks, Joe. So we have a few minutes for questions. If anybody has, we have a couple of questions here. So, so Joe, I'll let you take this one. What metrics do you suggest specifically to drive recruiter performance?
I don't think there's a hard and fast rule with that. It might sound like a bit of a cop-out, but I mentioned earlier, there's so many variables, even within the same staffing business, if you're working different verticals, or you've got different levels of experience within your team, different job roles in sales and recruiting. So what I'd say is analyzing the data or looking at the data to understand what good looks like in your business. You know, is there a certain number of interviews or submissions that when you reach that level, your conversion rate increases for either job or candidate? Thinking about some of maybe the higher level things like client churn, client return on effort. So how much effort does it take you to get the dollars through the door? Because again, I think a lot of the time the final numbers looked at how many dollars did we make, but there's a story that leads to that as well. So I would say getting under the hood of your own data and trying to look at that. And if you want to connect separately at anyone about your business, I'd be happy to have a chat about this stuff, as you can probably tell. But it's individualized, it's unique.
Great. Next question is, we're struggling to get more of our seasoned salespeople to enter their calls, meetings, visits, et cetera, in Bullhorn? Do you have any suggestions?
I think it comes back to the point you touched on, Laura, that what is the value to the end user of recording the data? If it's so they can, if the data is not used at all, there's no value. If it's so they can be told they didn't do enough of those things, there's probably no value to them. But what we've found is that by engaging end users in their own real-time data, giving them immediate value and gratification in it as well, but more importantly, giving them value in that data. So helping guide them on their day-to-day, helping them to remember the thousands of things they have to do every day and when to do them and who with, really helps them in their day. It helps them be organized in their head. And also gamification is important with this, right? We can't forget we work in often a very highly motivated, competitive industry. So we should celebrate these things as well. So I think it's a combination of those things tend to drive much better adoption, but you also need top-down buy-in for any of this stuff to achieve that, in my opinion.
Yeah, and that kind of a new question just came in, which I think that kind of leads into is how do you then empower a team to use data when there's a resistance or a lack of understanding?
I think like anything, communication. Why is it you invested in the amazing ATS of Bullhorn and perhaps the automation products and the analytics products? You're investing in all of these pieces of software in the front office to empower people, to help them be more successful. And I think if you are able to articulate that to the team, the benefit to them in using any system, even outside of analytics or a Bullhorn product, I think that should help, get people on the same page. Software adoption is still not an easy thing. Think in your personal life, how many people don't adopt their cell phone in the same way as you do, or other things, So there's always going to be a challenge there. But I think education, demonstrating value, going back and reiterating that value and showing them where it's worked for others will drive that type.
I think the other piece there too is that one of the powerful parts of Bullhorn Analytics is yes, we're putting data in the hands of those users and putting data in the hands of those teams, but they're able to in a lot of cases slice and dice that data, right? They can go into their own deck and they can go look at their clients and say, hey, where am I spending my time, or who have I made the most placements with? And that won't necessarily impact any of the other reporting or the things that you've built, but allowing people to have ownership over their book of business or their candidates and being able to manipulate that data on their own is also very powerful. And again, that's just, it's done at their desk level. That's not going to impact this team over here or leadership reports or anything like that. So again, it's really sticky in that way of, hey, I've got a little bit of taste, I have these actionable insights, but now I want to know more, right? It's just like with anything, kind of once you start to incorporate it and see it, you really see kind of adoption evolve a lot in that way. And then you see, again, through actionable insights, I think we also then see users say, oh, well, if I know this, now I want to know, now I know why about what I'm doing, right? So
there's
very cool.
A question here actually is slightly related to the earlier question about what metrics are most important, but there's one that what are the top 2 to 3 actionable insights to provide revenue generating activities? I think actionable insights are designed, all of them, to drive revenue generating activities, but I always look for low hanging fruit wherever I can. So contractor or consultant redeployment is extremely low across the industry, often single digit percentages. So actionable insights that drive the action of speaking to those consultants towards the end of their assignment and submitting them to new opportunities. And if we think about the industry challenges right now, looking at from a business development perspective, one that Laura touched on would be very much about remembering to consistently speak to clients that you've placed with previously. It's I think a well-documented fact that it's easier to sell to customers you've sold to previously because you have terms of business, you have a relationship of sorts. So trying to penetrate those accounts and reminding people to take those actions, I think will help certainly start to chip away at the 2 biggest challenges in the industry right now.
Yeah, and an interesting question, kind of thinking about technology then is with today's technology, what are your thoughts regarding phone calls versus texting for recruiting? And I guess if we think about that in the data perspective or from an analytics perspective, Joe, what are your thoughts there?
I think the data should inform what's working, but Laura, you're probably far more qualified than me to talk about this one from an omni-channel perspective. The fact is, actually, you take that one.
Yeah, right. As I started saying, I'm like, probably yes. Yeah, I think the interesting component here is understanding the right time to use which method, right? And that's going to be different based on your firm and what type of staffing and recruitment that you're doing. What we often see is some type of introduction, either via email or phone, is usually really powerful, and then taking it to text after that, right? I think we all kind of sometimes get a text on our phone where it's like, hey, Joe, where's my appointment? And you might not know if that person, who that person is. And so if you've had a conversation and you can say to someone, hey, going forward, do you prefer text or phone? That's really powerful. The other component is from like a first approach. Should I call you or should I text you? Again, omni-channel, and what we mean by omni-channel, if you guys haven't heard that phrase before, is, I always use the example of I get a call from my kid's school about a thunderstorm or early dismissal or something like that. And I get an email, a phone call, and a text message all at one time, right? So omni-channel is not doing that. Omni-channel is saying, hey, when it's really urgent, I'm going to send a text message. Or if it's something where you need to pick up your kid, we're going to call you right away. But if it's just telling you what's happening this week at school, maybe that's an email, right? So thinking about when the right time is to use each component. And so that's kind of a broad answer, but it really does depend on kind of the type of staffing you're doing. We see a lot of companies moving towards texting. We hear a lot about candidates preferring texting and being able to engage via text. And so I always like to say it's the right introduction you make to using texting as that platform.
Yeah, it's a very, very solid point. There's actually a question just popped in that is there a danger that a recruitment company becoming too data centric along the way of losing the ability to be instinctive with one's approach? I mean, this is a hot topic, right? And actually, when we founded Cube19 back in 2012, this was really a hot topic, because I think companies can have what we found at the time actually is companies had either too much data or too little data. So really it's just a mess in Excel spreadsheets. They can't get to anything meaningful, or they're not recording data, so they haven't got anything meaningful. So we were trying to help companies get this data into something understandable, intuitive, and help direct people. So I think there are some companies out there in some industries that won't make a decision without data. Probably companies that are at extreme scale where processes are very clearly defined. I think in staffing and most other businesses, you need to use your gut as well. You need to take the data, you take your experience, and I think you then make a judgment call based on it. Because knowing the variables within staffing and within your client base and within your employee base, I think is so important to say, well, that data actually out of context is wrong. So pairing the two together, I think, is very important. I don't think a company can be too data driven if they're looking at data the whole time, but bringing those gut feel and data together and then measuring the outcome of what happened next, I think is your sort of utopian world there.
Absolutely. I think, my previous role, we were a Cube19 / Bullhorn Analytics client. My role specifically there was on the learning and development side. And we used this mindset a lot to determine how we would train our recruiters, how we would drive our sales teams. So absolutely being really data driven, but then using our best practices or our methodologies to differentiate ourselves. And also that's when we can figure out where those recruiters can still be instinctive, right? So we're showing them their list of all those contractors coming off assignment maybe. They then can have that list of however many contractors that is, then they can start to use their instincts on who to call first, what they know is happening, right? How you want them to work within that mindset. So again, it's almost like data's driving it, but then your instincts can come in. And so that's where we also talk about too, of like, hey, making sure we're spending the time doing the right things. We're going to drive you to where we want you to be with our data. But once you're there, now this is where your recruiter skills come in. These are where your salespeople skills come in. This is where all the training we've given you about how to do this job. This is where that comes in once we've driven you to that point. I think we probably have time for maybe one or two more. Let's see, what are your top 3 to 5 metrics? When do you review that? Daily, weekly, monthly?
I think changing the metrics you measure too regularly drives inconsistency. So I would say that you know, and there's different types of metrics. There's overall business outcome metrics. Then there's the operational metrics. Then there's the actionable insights. I think different categories of metric. So I would say knowing what your business outcome metrics are, they probably shouldn't change too frequently. When it comes to things like actionable insights, though, there's scenarios, and I'll give quite a generic scenario. If you have a full desk recruiter who focuses on both sales, business development, and fulfilling those jobs from a recruiting perspective, if they've got a huge amount of vacancies live, qualified good vacancies, there should probably be more of a focus towards delivery at that point, or vice versa. So having knowledge of that and using the data to guide, I think from the desk level, changing perspective and focus at the right time is really important, or coaching and mentoring those users through how to understand the data. Again, should be very intuitive anyway, but knowing you've got lots of jobs and no coverage on those jobs, it should lead to them making their own decisions and being empowered to understand and be driven by data more.
Excellent. And then I think last question is there training from Bullhorn to use the ATS effectively to get this information? I think this is a question we get often, Joe, and so that might be good to address. It says we don't really know, or we don't use a good percentage currently.
Yeah, I think I would definitely connect with your account manager on that basis if there's a desire to utilize more of the platform and get more value. We have an incredible customer success team that is trained up across all the products across the platform. So if it's a specific ATS query, they can help with that. Or if it's how do I get access to more of this data, or how do I automate more process, they will be able to very much guide you on how to get the best out of it. So I think the short answer is yes, we absolutely want to work with all of our customers to make sure they get the ultimate value they can from our platform, but definitely connect with your account manager on that front.
Excellent. I think that is it from a Q&A perspective. As Joe said earlier, if you guys have any questions after the session, feel free to reach out to Joe or myself or to your sales team as well. The next session in a couple of weeks, we'll dive more specifically into Bullhorn Analytics itself. So you'll be able to see kind of a lot of what we talked about today in action and get a more hands-on experience with it. In the meantime, I hope you guys all enjoyed today. It was great to kick Monday off with you, and thanks again, and we'll talk soon. Bye, everybody.